Thank you for coming in. Come on in. Come on. I'm tipping in here. And it's the last panel of this very long good day. So we appreciate your attendance and attention. And thank you all for coming in. We're going to talk about, I didn't make up this title. This must have been a Sokobi title. You know, this is a Sokobi title. No politician goes to politician school.
Ooh, that was me.
Strategies. Okay, that's a Tamara title.
I still want to throw him under the bus.
Strategies for engaging local state officials to advance environmental justice. We have a great panel here. I'm Leslie Fields. I'm the Environmental Justice Community Partnerships Director at the Sierra Club in Washington, D.C. We also have a Health and Communities program that I direct. I was on a moderated panel earlier, so this morning. So I've just had a wonderful time here. I hope you all have had a great time too. Got some good information and good networking. And so I've got some great friends on this panel. This is like so exciting. And you know, we're just going to talk informally and really have a conversation about what are strategies that each of these great active issues. We have someone here from Maryland. We have my colleague Gustavo from Sierra Club, Virginia, my colleague Daniel and Kamonian, and I'm also, full disclosure, on the board of Empower DC in Washington, DC. And then we have, we actually have the Honorable Stephanie Maddin Smith, who we've all known for a very long time, who is a dedicated community activist, attorney, and we are very proud of her. She's coming off a very successful state legislative session. She's the state assemblywoman representing the 45th legislative district in Baltimore. So, and so I wanted to say that we all have to work with legislators and politicians all the time. We have people from 3 different jurisdictions. I did this deliberately to get some strategies and tactics about how best to work with, you know, your local elected officials to promote EJ community development that's sustainable, that's equitable, and that is community driven. And I'm going to start with Tamara and go down the line, and we'll end up with Stephanie, Stephanie, if you don't mind responding to some of the things you'll hear going along the way, since you are now a politician. And and I appreciate Stephanie bringing her part of her family here. Her husband Calvin's here, and Spencer is here, being really, really cute. Okay.
I'm distracted.
Yeah, I know. Just thank you, Spencer, for coming by. You were a very smart boy. You picked such great parents. So I'm happy you're here, and I'll put you to work soon. You have a job. Yeah, right? Okay. So, Tamara, do you mind? I'm going to talking for about maybe 10-15 minutes about some of the things you've been working on and how you've been interfacing with, you know, political stakeholders and the good, bad, and the ugly. Sure. I'm going to time, everybody gets 15 minutes. I'm going to time you.
Sure.
Okay.
So, in my current position as a North America Director for 350.org, it's much more strategic in terms of thinking about North America, where for Canada, where the tar sands come from, and West Virginia, where they end up, and thinking about all of that work as a grid. So it's usually in this position thinking about what are the key places where the work is going because the pollution is going there, and what are the strategies we can wrap around the communities that are there with their input and with some really intense conversations around what the immediate need is and how it connects to the climate work that we hear about and the end of fossil fuels, which we're going for. In my previous position as the executive director of the Maryland Environmental Health Network, it was a similar process. We just looked at the regional work differently and through a health lens. So we spent a bunch of time with community members all year round thinking about, we would usually start the year with what is keeping you up at night? And based on the answer to that question, we would figure out what parts of that relate to what seems to be a unnecessarily complicated bureaucracy and how we could get from what's keeping you up at night to what kind of solutions do we need to propose. So 2 years ago, we had this question around what's keeping you up at night, and the community members who were part of Community of Communities, a bunch of folks working on natural gas infrastructure from a public health perspective, they said, what's keeping us up at night is that the Public Service Commission website is really hard to read in English. And as English speakers who read English, that is a pretty important thing to say. That this website that is in your native tongue doesn't make any sense to you. And it brought us to a place where we thought, well, that means we need to talk to a concentric group of stakeholders because there are folks for whom English is not their first language. So if native English speakers are having a problem, that means all the other communities in our purview are having this problem. So we started to talk about, well, what else? Well, even if we were to understand a single thing that's going on, we have no way to keep track of it. This is like our problem. We have to develop have a full-time job on top of our full-time job, just keeping up with what's gonna destroy our health. So community members told us specifically they want basic notification and transparency, which apparently is in the mission statement of the agencies that are responsible for delivering this information. And after talking to them specifically about what they need, the first thing I thought was, wow, that's it? There's so much going wrong in the world. All you want is to be able to read things that are in English and be told when things are about to happen to you. Those seem like fairly reasonable ideas. So we started to plan for what does language look like? Who are the agencies that are implicated? Going through a real matrix of all the different agencies at each part of this work that could be responsible for it, and figuring out who has previously said things that are supportive and who said go kick rocks. So then we thought, okay, let's line up who hasn't told us to kick rocks with this idea about just wanting to know things in English and be able to be protective of ourselves. And when we got to talking to local health officers, the Department of Health, then it moved to a conversation around, well, let's rope them in and start figuring out what agencies are responsible for it. And then talking to the University of Maryland Environmental Law Clinic. Are there already ways that these folks should be talking to us, or do we need to invent something? And after doing some research, they said, no, you need to invent something. Because speaking plainly to people is not in the law anywhere. So then we added another group of people to our merry band of people just trying to get information in English and understand health, right? So we take that group to a legislator, Delegate Robin Lewis, for all intents and purposes, and she's actually sitting here. So we had a conversation about, well, turns out we need to know things, and we need to know them in the language that we speak in. Can you help us develop something for that? And here are our ideas. Here's what we would like to see happen. Here's when the time frame, because we have environmental justice concerns and we're already looped in 7 years after that happens and 2 weeks before it's about to happen, before we've already missed the boat. We would like to also have this happen in a timely way. And taking all that stuff to her, we had a long conversation about what it means to develop a strategy to bring in all the people who could potentially oppose you and make that all palatable in a package that speaks to a bunch of other legislators who are really busy and don't have time to digest what we just did. So mostly we worked with her around developing language that would make sense to people, asking questions that might be asked in advance, polling people around what it would mean, like what kinds of questions are we gonna get? Are we gonna end up in a place where we're in a hearing and then get some dumb question that unravels everything because we didn't think to find out who doesn't know the answer? Who are the people who are most eligible for understanding this up front, and how can we strategize? And then she went to work talking to folks to figure out who would be most likely to be supportive and who's gonna tell us to kick rocks if we don't find someone who lives across the street from said legislator to do the work. So by virtue of thinking about health impact assessments at the Public Service Commission and basic notification at the Public Service Commission, that's a really neat sort of package of ways that we have gone through thinking about our problems, moving from a place where communities design the solution and figuring out who we need to have in the space to do it.
That's wonderful. And that was really under time.
Oh, cool. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. That's great. More time for Q&A. So Gustavo, you're in Virginia, you're in Richmond. You all have particularly interesting things going on with your governor, lieutenant governor.
Oh man, we can't throw rocks though.
Yeah, right.
People
And
are
such
interesting.
yeah, so let us know how's Old Dominion doing down there now?
The capital of the South, yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity, Leslie. My name is Gustavo Angeles. I am the Environmental Justice Program Coordinator. I work with the Sierra Club, the Virginia chapter of the Sierra Club. And yes, as Leslie mentioned, this year, while the legislature was in session, because the legislature in Virginia only meets for 60 or 45 days, depending on the year, right? These scandals came up, surface. first the governor, after I believe was the lieutenant governor, and after was the attorney general. The three elected, statewide elected officials. Yes, all of them are Democrats. And that didn't come up. So how you deal with that? What you do, right? When you have a governor that, because he believes that he has he's white and he has white privilege, he's entitled to stay. And he will stay there for 2 more years. And in Virginia, there is no re-election, so that's another key piece, right? It's like how you start bargaining and how you start dealing with a person that knows that cannot be re-elected. Right? Like, well, okay, yeah, you don't like me, huh? So what? Throw me out. I'm not running next election. It's my privilege, and I'm going to stay here, regardless of what you said or what you want. So what is happening, to make the story short, since that and several organizations start calling out for resignation, he started cutting communication, right? The communication, at least with environmental work or area, was not too great at the beginning, all right? Things didn't start in January. Things came up before. We have a pipeline running through Virginia, and there is a heavy opposition from the environmental movement against this pipeline. Several reasons. But that's when the communications start getting broken down. After this scandal and several of the groups calling for resignation, the governor started shutting down those communications, right? So it's sort of like right now is not common, or several people haven't seen this before, that you are, how you work with an administration that doesn't talk to you. How you proceed and see like, hey, what are you gonna be looking or running for? What kind of bills are you proposing for next year? Because we know that most likely there is a bill that the executive branch wants to push through the legislature. We can support or try to put some bills that are similar and they might pass. Right? By the way, the legislature in Virginia, the majority, this doesn't mean anything, but it's been in the House of Republicans for a while. Right? They have the majority by 1, but it's still the majority. So most of the committees where you will see the laws, they're held by them, and that's where most of the bills get killed. Just to give you a small summary of how this happened. In Virginia, I don't know how it's in other states, but a bill will go through a committee or subcommittee, depending how fast they want to kill it. And only now, by the way, legislatures are the only ones allowed to introduce bills. Nobody else can, right? So if a legislature doesn't like your idea or the idea of a group, that's it. It won't be a bill. So when it enters the committee or the subcommittee, it has to be approved to pass through the committee. And if it doesn't get approved, that's it for the bill, right? And after that, it goes through the whole Senate or the House, depending where you are, and get approved, and we'll go after move to the other branch. So yes, so that's how it goes, and it goes again to another committee and keep going. So you have like around 5 or 6 times options to kill a bill, and at the end, the last option is the governor that could decide to sign it or not sign it, right? So that's how a bill goes. Anyways, so the executive branch is not talking with you. You need to still work with them. And that's where we are right now, right? Trying to see what can we do, what kind of bills they do, to see how can we work, because you only have, as I said, 60 or 45 days. And when it's 60 days, it's because we have a budget in discussion. So that takes most of the time, right? So one of the things that I consider that is important is to educate the legislature. Because on those 60 or 45 days, they're looking around 3,000 bills. I don't know how many of you can read around 3,000 bills in 60 or 45 days, right? So that gives you an idea of what they see and what they don't see, right? Most of the times, they vote depending on what their caucus decides or how their friend votes on it, or if somebody comes and talks to them, and that's when you start having the education part, right? And not only telling that legislature about that bill in particular, but make it know that it's important. Make that legislator know that he or she should care about that bill and why. Establishing the connections. Right? For the environmental issue is not a priority for all the legislators, right? But you have to show them, if you start doing environmental justice, you have to start showing them the connections of how this will benefit specific communities. And the bills that we propose, they have to be for everybody, right? We cannot be running bills saying like, hey, I want more EV chargers in the state, because who can afford electric cars? It's not like I'm against those people, but put a bill to have public transportation to be electric. That will force the market to eventually have more electric cars. So put the benefit there for the people that need this the most. Not for just the people that have $30,000 or $40,000 in their pocket and that might be able to afford an electric car. Well, not everybody does that, right? But you have to show them the legislature, what you should care about these people, right? Yes, it might be a bill that provides more jobs. Yes, this job doesn't have to be building a pipeline. It has to be a job that is what we call green jobs, right? That could provide more jobs either by putting solar panels or wind turbines. There are other kinds of jobs that also are, they will have enough time and they won't be seasonal, right? And that's when you start making connections with those people. So you have to have a communication with the legislature and be like, hey, you know what, we're thinking on doing this bill, what you think, talk with the legislature and bring some of their constituents. If you are an organization that has grassroots, that's really important because they will listen to what the constituents want, what they care about. And that's the important part. Don't go by yourself if you are representing an organization. Go with your constituents and be like, hey, look, I want to introduce you to some of your constituents, and these are their stories. Those stories are unique. Everybody has their own story of how they got here, or what are their needs, and why, and how that affects or how that matters to you. Regardless if it's health, education, lack of jobs, you need a better road, whatever. That story is unique because it's yours. It's not a story that a lobbyist can tell you by coming with a bunch of papers and tell you, oh, well, the statistics or the numbers says this. But you have that personal story, and that's why it's important to contact them with the constituents and show them that the people care about this. Either by meeting them at their offices in their local towns, which is easier, or by going to when they meet at the capital, right? So that's one thing that it will help you to. You will pay in the long way. You will pay good results, and that's important. Another thing that is important to consider is that, as I was saying, the EJ factor, the environmental justice factor. If we're going to talk specifically, exclusively about environmental bills, right? You have to make that connection. That's where you're going to get most of these representatives connected. Because some of them will say, well, yeah, if you're going to talk about environment, that's for some rich people that they really, most of them are retired already and they don't have anything to do and they start caring for the environment. And that's not true. Because the people that are the most affected usually for these environmental problems are people that are suffering every day. And those are the people that you need to see how you're making them talk. And that's the ones they need to connect with. That requires to start talking with the people that are most affected, right? So that requires go and reach out to the community and groups that work in those communities and be like, hey, how can I support you, right? we at the Sierra Club, for example, we're starting to reach out to other organizations that work with directly affected communities to see how can we support their efforts. We don't need to be at the front. We just support in solidarity. Because it's not, I cannot bring the Sierra Club members and say like, yes, you know what? Having that coal ash pile or the coal dust on that port affects me because I live right next to it. No. Sierra Club members don't live in that area. It's the wrong crowd. That's the truth. I mean, you have to acknowledge who are you talking with and who are you going to bring, right? Because if the Sierra Club members are doing that because they care about the environment, but it's not because they are suffering the consequences. It's not like they are being poisoned by lead or they are suffering from any health issues because of that. No, but it's easier. Our best way is to partner with another organization and say like, hey, how can we help you? How would you like us to do? You want us to show up for a city council meeting, for example? We show up and say that we support you. And the legislators or the city council members are going to be watching and be like, oh, so not only that group, it's this other group. Okay, so now I'm thinking, right? Another thing that is important to do is have campaigns at the local level. The statewide campaigns are good and they produce important results, but they take time. For a statewide campaign, you need more votes. If you're usually working in areas, you might be able to reach one or two legislators because that's the area that you're covering. If you're working on a local issue, most likely you will reach the majority of those, let's say, city council members or county board supervisors, and you are able to do something. Because when you're working with a group, you need to show that you are producing something. You cannot be running a campaign for 5 years and be like, okay, well, next year, maybe. You know, people are going to get tired. People have other priorities. So you have to be running short campaigns, what I call it local campaigns, because those are winnable. I can meet with those 5 or 8 local representatives and have people from their districts and be like, hey, these people are from your district and they care about this issue. And what is your position? And you're going to start making changes there while you have the big state campaign going through time. So that's another important thing. I'm a firm believer of those small campaigns. At the local level, they can produce more things that try to be pushing for a statewide campaign. But you also have to acknowledge there are limitations. In Virginia, usually, the thing that the branch that decided most of the things is the legislative branch, right? You have the Dillon rule, I don't know if you're familiar with that, which if the legislature didn't give you the right to do something, you cannot do it. What that means, that, for example, if you want to ban trash bags in Virginia, in a locality, you're not allowed to do that because the legislature didn't allow that. You might be able to, you have to get creative, and start putting other kind of ways to try to proceed that. But there are states like Virginia that are controlled by the legislature, and that's a problem, right? Because that's the structure. And why that happened, I will have to go back in history and see who is allowed to be a legislator, because granted, they're elected, but that doesn't mean anybody can run, right? If I'm gonna talk about Virginia, the salary of a legislator is around $25,000. I don't know who can live with $25,000, because that's one option, so it's considered a part-time job, right? As I told you, 60 days or 45 days, right? 60 or 45 days. Okay, part-time job. Who will give you 60 or 45 days of time off so you can be at the legislature? If it's a part-time job, right? So who's allowed to be there? Who's allowed to run for office? I mean, don't tell me, yes, you are elected because there's a democracy and we vote for you and you become elected. But that's not my time?
Yes. Finish your thought.
We need some of hers.
So,
I was actually gonna ask.
so that's important. And that's what I was saying, we need to go back to history, right? And see why the legislature meets January, February, and March. Well, because it's winter time. What happened in winter time? Who was a legislator before? People who own land, people who own slaves, right? Right. Those people in the winter, the lands are empty. So therefore, they have time to do that, right? That's why. So when you start looking at things, it's not like things didn't happen 5 years ago. You need to start looking back in time. That's why in the beginning I said this is Richmond, where I work, is the capital of the South. And you will know that really well when you get there and start driving to the streets and seeing the monuments. We have a monument avenue.
Yes.
We have a Confederate street.
Yeah.
People living there on that street. Okay? So you see it everywhere. We have a Lee Bridge. So that's where you see it. And when you go to the legislator, you are reminded of that. Right, I will stop there.
Thank you, Gustavo. We'll pick this up. I'm going to get everybody's opening remarks in. Next we have Daniel Pielago. Daniel is the organizing director for Power DC. I'm proud to say I'm on the board. I learn a lot from him and the other staff at the executive director, Parisa Naruzzi. I live in the District of Columbia as well, and we do have home rule, we do have a mayor, we do have a city council, and Power DC is in there all the time fighting for communities in the neighborhoods. And it's not easy because we really truly do have taxation without representation. We have the population greater than 8 states. You know? Yeah. So Daniel, please tell us about what's happening and what you all have been doing up in the city council with Mayor Bowser.
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Pielago. As Leslie mentioned, I'm the organizing director with Power DC. We are a grassroots membership-based organizing group in the district. We've been around for about 15 years, and we work on a variety of issues. I've primarily been heading up our work in the public housing environment of the district. Just as a backdrop to all of this, the federal government is moving to reposition over 100,000 units of public housing around the country. Reposition is a nice word for getting rid of public housing. So what we are beginning to see in the district is repositioning happening there. Now, for years, we've been testifying at city council, just raising up the issues, bringing city council members to the properties, showing them the issues, and people are living in some really horrible conditions, environmental issues, right? We've just found out that we have a horrendous lead issue on our properties. Mold is a tremendous issue on the majority of the properties. However, that has, to be honest, fallen on deaf ears. What happens with public housing is because it's a federally funded program, local governments, for the most part, will be like, well, that's federal government. Talk to Dr. Carson. We're not trying to hear that.
That's a different panel.
Yeah. But so we've been making that case. We've been making the case that we need local funding. I think the last president that invested something in public housing was Carter. So it's been a minute since there's been financing, money coming in to improve public housing. So public housing, and we've, it's funny because that's the macro way of displacement. Micro way is for landlords to let buildings run down, so they can push people out and raise the rents. In DC, we have great rent control laws, but there are the market is so hot that landlords will find ways to push people out. And now that's what we're seeing on a local level and on a national level, of course, right? Public housing sits on huge amounts of land, where they can build up, they can build out, and on the promise that people will be able to come back. So right now, our local housing authority is planning on repositioning over 2,400 units of public housing. So, we are troublemakers. Like I make no bones about that, and we're not troublemakers in the sense that we're not out there actually doing like direct actions. We're not shutting stuff down, but we have brains and we can read, and we will sit there and look at these resolutions, for example, that the Housing Authority is passing to reposition housing, and it's essentially privatization of properties. They tell us we don't know the definition of privatization, and that's why we have this kind of adversarial relationship with our local government, because it's a very patriarchal in the sense that they're trying to tell us what we know or what we don't know. So we keep pushing, we're going to keep pushing. So as Gustavo mentioned, I think we work with directly impacted people. We are not advocates in the traditional way. So our job really is to bring people who are directly affected to be in these groups. And not only at the time of the hearings or the meetings, but I'm sure as many of us on this panel, in going to their offices and in going to any presentations they may have. I remember years ago we brought a group of parents to Georgia Avenue and Columbia Road, where they had just demolished the school. And Jim Graham, who, rest in peace, has passed away, was a Ward 1 council member, sees us, with a group of about 10 moms, Black and Latino moms, and he just rolls by. He keeps driving. He was supposed to park like right there, because that's where it was happening, and there were open parking spaces, but he keeps rolling by. So, to a certain extent, we were like, okay, our presence is having some sort of effect. It may not be like, what wins, but we're players in the game, and I think that's our role, really, is to be players in the game and to open up discussion, not only with us, but as Gustavo said, with other organizations doing similar work, more advocate organizations. Something that we have found, I don't want to say successful because we're always in a fight, but something that has been working for us is we want the council members, because that's who we primarily deal with, to know us and know who we are. But some of them are like just out there. We had one council member, and I'm not going to mention names. I'll drop some clues if everybody wants to do some sleuthing. We had one council member who is on our housing committee. We brought several residents from properties that are in trouble, and public housing redevelopments have not worked in the district. We've seen people displaced. They'll say relocated. We've seen people displaced, moved to other properties, and then have not returned, right? There's properties that have been up to like 16 years there's a literal parking lot that is now waiting to be redeveloped in the district that was formerly a public housing property. So we bring up these issues to this council member, and her response, because we believe that community ties are important. It's not just about the housing. And her response to us, if we're having residents testify to this to her, and she said, well, as long as they have 4 walls, isn't that enough? And I said, well, I think a roof would be important too. But that's kind of like who we're dealing with, right? And a lot of them are being pulled in many different directions. DC is a big money city. We're the most gentrified city in the country, or at least that's what the recent reports are saying. So there's a lot of big money interests that are well-resourced, well-organized in their ears. So that's what we're up against. So we continue to find different ways to engage. And one of the better ways that we've been engaging actually with our government is to work with the staff, right? Trying to get some FaceTime with a council member is great, but their staff are the ones that are usually doing the work, that are doing all the research, and that are a little more open-minded. I don't want to sound ageist or anything, but there's like the same council member has like a younger, more progressive staff member who's sitting down with us and breaking down like, we recently met with her and she was like, if you come asking for new money for a project It's not happening. However, if you find a way to use existing money, that the city is already using for these gentrification projects, and you ask for that money, you may be more likely to win something. So, I think building those type of relationships are important too, not just with kind of the face, right, the actual politician, the council member, but the people who are, and not the people, other folks don't do work, but the folks that are doing, the grunt work, that are doing, as I mentioned, a lot of the research, a lot of the writing up the bills and all of those kind of things. It's really important for us to establish relationships that way, because, we not only have like a way to interact with them, but we're also getting some valuable information, right? The next time we go see this council member, we're not, sometimes we can go in and I think what we've been trying to, or what we're moving away from, is really trying to appeal to their morality, which sounds a little messed up, but hard luck stories and this is so bad only goes a certain way. They've heard those things. So we need to find ways where, it's still important to tell those stories, but to also come with a plan that the city is behind already to a certain extent, or there are mechanisms within the city government to use, and say, we have this plan. Now you react to that. How come we can't have money from the Housing Production Trust Fund, just for example? So I think it's those kind of things, thinking somewhat outside of the box, but it's also inside of the box, because as I mentioned, kind of trying to appeal to like their moral center isn't the most successful tack we've been noticing, because as I mentioned, in a city like the District of Columbia, where millions of dollars are being extracted, and there's still opportunities to do that, they have a lot of people in their favor. So and we are not, we'll do the protests, we'll do the rallies, we'll come and knock on their doors at home. So I think it's a mixture of all of that, knowing when to pull out those kind of tactics, and to use them effectively. While we are adversarial, I think we are trying to find ways to work together with council members. I think the mayor, our relationship is a little far gone. So, yeah, we will, exactly. Exactly.
Let's not talk about it.
Yeah, so that, I think it's, there's no silver bullet kind of solution, but I think being visible, being well informed on what you're doing, and obviously, as much as possible, and this is the tough part, because I believe to a certain extent, like, why are we making directly affected people work so hard,
Right.
but engaging them in finding the solution? Like at Berry Farm, which is a property, and I know a little over time, that's been demolished. We're working now with residents we've developed an architectural plan. We're trying to find out like a financing plan to all of that. But that way we're speaking in their language, and they have to react to that instead of us just going, say Berry Farm, it's the right thing to do. That's how we started. And that was a little bit of an issue. Now we're getting a little more traction, because we're like, okay, here's the footprint, here's all the setbacks. I don't even understand that stuff, right? And here's, a financial plan. Here's where money can come from. The one issue with that is that, the city government is we believe on full out attack, at least with public housing. So our challenge is, how are we going to be able to replicate that type of support for properties around the city? But that's the work of, finding people, finding where resistance is, and helping to support them.
I just wanted to borrow 30 seconds of my old time.
Yes. You want to reclaim your time?
Well, only because so much of what has been said has reminded me of the other parts of our strategy, not just how we get from having an idea to talking to someone who cares about it. We did a lot of stuff before that. We put out an environmental justice digest that looked at a year's worth of bills and analyzed them. Picked 10 before in the first 45 days of session, and 10 after the first 45 days of session, win, lose, or draw, and said, here's where our issues show up in your bill. And what that did in year one was mean we had a lot more meetings in year two, because that stuff went into people's mailboxes, and the legislator read it, and the staffer read it, and went, I didn't know my bill was an environmental justice bill. I just thought it was about doing this one thing that I was doing. So some of those meetings where I didn't realize my issue was your issue, this framework helps me understand where you're coming from. And at a time when I have time to think about it, I would be interested in planning together for a future. The other thing that we did was tie that to a luncheon on a hot topic for that year, because everybody has to eat. And also food is a very useful tool for all humans, community meetings, legislators, all people who chew food, sometimes let you talk to them while they do that. And so we pulled a little bit of money together to say, of all the things that we have covered in the digest that we touched you on the flyers that we put in your mailbox, and on the phone calls that we made, and the emails, and the meetings that we tried to have, we also said, the thing that we would like you to do more than anything is this, and here are the scientific reasons why, here are the medical professionals who are doing it, and most importantly, here are the community members who would benefit and potentially vote for you if you listen to these issues that they have presented along with this other. So I just wanted to make sure that I was clear that there were specific tools between the flyers and the digest and the thinking and the planning and the talking. We put all of that together to be able to say, you have a lot of priorities, but this one actually connects them. And for us, it has been useful as a strategy, just walking, not in an adversarial way, but in recognizing that creating a learning space. The last tool that I will mention is a environmental justice legislative team. So we held phone calls on Mondays that led to webinars during the summer, where we presented the issues in 90-minute format when everybody was not in the middle of campaigning or in the middle of being in office, where we brought those the 6 issues that came from that digest before that would have going to be the ones we went in the next year talking about, created 90-minute sessions where community members were able to weigh in on what was going to happen to them, and the legislator who was interested weighed in on it. That way we already started the conversation and set up a moment where we would be talking about it before it was 6 minutes to get up your elevator speech and get out of my case. So there is just a lot. I think it does take a lot for communities to raise issues, but that's where the advocacy community can be helpful, because we're not the kind of lobbyists who just say, here's this flashy thing. And in Maryland, we don't have necessarily the kind of legislators who would even respond to that. So I do think to some extent, it has to be a longer campaign of inclusion and a relationship building and information sharing.
Perfect. Thank you, Tamara, and I'm glad you claimed your time. So our next and final person is a dear friend of mine, and I'm very proud of her. She's a former student of mine at Howard Law School, helped us start the Howard Environmental Energy Law Society. Professor Waterhouse is out there now, okay, and I wanted you all to meet. And she's gone on to glory. The glorious things already. She was an attorney at Earth Justice. She then went to the city of Maryland and then ran for delegate and won, and had an incredibly successful first rookie year in the legislature. How many bills did you pass?
I introduced 7 and 4 of them became law.
Fantastic. So Stephanie, my dear, you know, you have been in all these places too, and now you are a legislator. Now you are a legislator. So you know, what you've heard and your most excellent experience, you know, all these things work, but like, what helped you be successful, you know, this session, and do you have any advice for our panelists here, or can they, you know, if you all wanted to have a dialogue about after what you talk about, you know, how we can collaborate?
Well, like, thank you for having me, and you're right, I've been the federal lobbyist, I've been that person pushing, you know, I've been the person that people are trying to influence now, and also, I'm a native Virginian, I lived in DC, and now I live in Maryland, so I've been in all these places, I think that's helpful, and I like to remind people, Maryland is also the South. I don't know if people don't understand because the Dixie line is there and we're here, but whatever. So I think that's important to recognize too, because Maryland is a state that is proportionally far more Black than Virginia, okay? It's like a third Black, and the state legislature is also a third Black. But it doesn't mean that because you have a Democratic supermajority, you're gonna get super progressive legislation or all the things that you would hope and dream. So I'm starting to realize, having grown up in a state where it was more conservative and there was more active tension between Dems and ours to get things done, that just because everyone appears here to be in the same party that's in charge does not mean that doesn't mean anything. You know what I'm saying? So I don't want to be a downer. You know, oh, if we get more of these people, it's going to be easier. Not necessarily. But I want to go back to a couple of things that I heard that I think are really important. And this is something, Leslie, you might not remember telling me when I first started out and I was getting frustrated with all these good people in the environmental community that I did not find particularly helpful to what I was doing. And you were saying, you know, nobody's pure, right? So just because someone is a community activist, just because someone's an elected official, just because someone's a business person, just because someone's an academic, don't canonize people. Like, they're not saints, they're just human beings. So I think that's something to also recognize when you're dealing in this type of work. Another thing that I think is really important is to power map, which goes back to something Daniel said. I think people are largely self-interested, and every once in a while that coincides with my moral values, but it might not. So I have to figure out what motivates people. So just if you're trying to lobby maybe a city council person or the Mayor Act, I'm now in this new role where I'm trying to lobby my colleague to care, right? So you never stop lobbying. I always tell people every job is a sales job and every job is a customer service job, even if you're not aware of that. Every job is that. So I'm just, you know, in a different position of trying to do that because I'm coming to this as the lobbyist, as a person that's trying to be, in my opinion, positive influencer going up against much more moneyed interests. And sometimes the moral part did work if you knew where that person was coming from. Maybe they just lacked an understanding of the issue, but they had some type of moral compass you could plug into, so you knew that that might work for them. But for a lot of people, it might be good just to visit their campaign donor list because that's all public information. And I think that a lot of people don't ever visit that. I mean, maybe because I'm petty, I just go and visit everybody. I just want to see, like, why are you doing this? Like, I don't understand. And sometimes it will make it more clear why people are doing some of the things they're doing. But sometimes people are doing something completely unhelpful to you, and it's not because they got money from somebody. But maybe their niece got a job. Maybe, like, it could be these things that don't seem obvious to you. So I think it's really important for you to try to figure out who's influencing the person you're trying to influence. Like, sometimes you're so focused on that person, we're not focused on the people that they listen to. Now, I know at the city council level, because that's more of a full-time job, they do have more support staff and people that are working with them all the time. But for a lot of state legislators, they don't have that robust a staff because it is a part-time job. I mean, it's hard to get someone to help you do that deep research work if they're only going to have a job, you know, for 2 months or something like that. So in many ways, you have more face time with state reps than you probably have with a council member or a federally elected official. And I've also been the federal the congressperson staff person. So I've been like on every side of this experience.
That's right, you were a CBC?
Yeah, right, for Congressman Keith Ellison, who's now the AG for Minnesota. So, you know, I've been on all sides of this, and I think that the most effective advocates had not only a story, like you said, but they also had a solution. Because I think everyone's like a pro at what's wrong. And we all can do that in our sleep, but a lot of people are waiting for, so what can I do? I think sometimes people haven't actually made an ask when they talk to a lot of elected officials. They thought they did, but no, you just told them everything that was wrong in your life. But you didn't give them anything that you thought could be helpful to removing or mitigating, the harm or whatever challenge you're facing. So I think one of the most basic things is make sure your ask is clear, so that any opportunity you're engaging with the decision maker, you've actually given them a decision to make. Don't assume that sharing your hardship is equivalent to asking them to do something specific. Another thing that I think is important is to figure out what matters to them and connect what you care about to that. And I don't think you have to lie to do that. It's just called, I think everything's interconnected, right? So I care a lot about environmental matters, but I know even my own colleagues in my district really don't care, right? So I'm gonna talk about jobs and link it to that and economic stability, or the fact that, our schools are struggling, but it doesn't help if a kid's been exposed to lead and now they have to go to school and they didn't eat food that day. I mean, we just tie it to so much stuff, and then it's like, oh yeah, that is messed up, and then, people will listen to you a little longer. But I think one of the things I found frustrating working in the mainstream environmental community is that sometimes people wanted people to care about something for the same reason they care about it. I don't give a crap if you don't care about it for the same reason I care about it. I just want you to care about it, So I think people need to get over like this purity, like I need you to think climate change is the biggest thing in the world. Even if you don't think it is, but you're willing to fight like it is, that's all I care about. Like, are you gonna pass this bill? Are you gonna vote for this? That's all that matters. So I think that's something that's really important, is to stay focused on like the objective, not about like the feelings people have about something. We're trying to get this done. Another thing that I think is really important is your messenger. I think Gustavo was speaking to this earlier. When I was working at Earth Justice, I did not need to be Earth Justice. I'm gonna be, mamas for air. I'm gonna be whoever it needs to be because I don't need Earth Justice to be the face of this if that's not gonna move the needle with someone. And I'll never forget that, the NAACP was doing a really good series of reports on environmental justice threats, particularly from coal-fired power plants. Remember the cold-blooded reports?
Yeah.
And they were great because they were at the community level. They're talking about threats, giving good data. And so when we're going to a Congressional Black Caucus office or something of that nature, it was so much better to say, the NAACP has done this research. They've done this. And I literally saw another organization that was a largely white organization pretty much cite to everything in that report and then package it themselves. And I'm like, nobody wants to hear this crap from you. Like, this doesn't make any sense. If you want to be influential, think about what already has credibility with the person you're trying to influence. Don't try to force yourself to be that. Find the people that already are credible and join in league with them in a respectful, not co-opting way. If they already have work product, lift their work product up. You don't have to center your own work. So that's some of the stuff that I think I've seen people it's like you're kicking a goal in your own goal. You're hurting yourself needlessly. Like, what are you doing? Work with the people that already have the credibility, that are already doing the work, and already have some level of influence and respect from the people you're trying to influence. One of the things that I think is always going to be frustrating is that it's a lot easier to lie than it is to have sound data. I mean, lying, you just whip it up, and people are going to eat that, and you're going against people that are going to lie all the time. I'm just being honest. A lot of the people you're going to go up to are going to say this is going to kill this industry, or it's going to hurt this job, it doesn't exist. I mean, they're going to say anything. So you can't get caught up fighting on their turf, but what you could do is kind of anticipate what are the type of lies I'm already going to probably have to counter, and just already be on the offense with information. Because I think people get caught up in trying to refute someone else, but now all your energy is playing on their turf, and that's not helping you to influence the person you're trying to influence. You should already anticipate some of those bigger lies. This is job killing regulation is an easy one. Someone's gonna use that. So just already anticipate, that. There's sometimes with things about affordable housing, I know some people, here might be working on that. There's all that boogeyman stuff about how this is gonna, bring, bad stuff to your community in terms of either crime or things of that nature. And what's interesting, because Baltimore has a lot of very, very old, public housing, some of the oldest, in our nation, we have a lot of violence reduction areas that we've targeted. And I always tell people, wow, there's no public housing in any of those places. Interesting, because that's not where the higher rates of crime are. It's just a perception that people are, have about certain things. So there's a lot of things that you can anticipate based on either biases or things that you've heard in your advocacy, in your door knocking, in your outreach. Don't wait for someone to tell the lie so that you're bouncing back. Already anticipated. I think another thing, particularly for me with now being in the role in Maryland, and Robin, if you want to jump in from the audience, that'd be awesome, is that I've seen some of the things that I was challenged by being in the national environmental space, I guess about 10 years ago, and now being an elected official in Maryland, I'm realizing how often the statewide environmental community is not really positioning themselves to be influential over a great deal of people that should be with them, but because they're not hiring diverse staff of different race and class backgrounds, because they're not really making any effort for their organizations to mirror the actual people they're trying to influence. It's like they're making their jobs harder than it really needs to be. And it's like seeing where we were, 10 years ago, and they're still me. But I'm just saying, even as bad as it is now, it was, It was
Yeah, I remember.
So that to me
25
is
years
mind-boggling. It's you're up here, literally we have 45 people out of 181 in the whole General Assembly, in the House of Delegates rather, that are Black, and yet hardly any of the advocates that most of the groups are sending. And you remember, all the Black electeds are Democrats, so the agenda around the environment will be much stronger with Democrats. So it's like you're missing an entire group of people because you really haven't meaningfully thought about how to influence them. You just assume that if you reached out to the Dem infrastructure, they'll just, come along, and it might not work that way. So I think a lot of people are they're living in this 20th century role if I just talk to the white important people and then everyone else is supposed to like, you know what I mean, get a line behind that. And that's over. So I just want to tell you, don't do that. Stop doing that if you think that's okay. Also, I think you also have to look at the resources right in your community. One of the great things, at least about Maryland to me, we have so many institutions, historically black colleges. I'm an alum of 2 HBCUs. I went to Hampton, I went to Howard for law school. The fact that we're not making relationships with the young people who come from many communities that are plagued by the environmental justice threats that we've, kind of talked about, people who are aware of the harm that lead and poor air quality, can mean for their neighbors and for their families. It seems like such a missed opportunity to create some type of pipeline to many of the organizations in our region, not just Maryland. Like, that's low-hanging fruit. These are people who are studying biology. These are people who are studying chemistry. These are people who are going to be future engineers and future lawyers. Why are we not tapping into this ongoing resource? And I think a lot of it is because many leaders of these organizations just don't have any professional ties or educational ties to these institutions, thus they're not cultivating these relationships. But to me, that's their responsibility as leaders to do so, particularly in a state where the people you're going to ultimately be trying to influence are very likely going to be people of color, and you don't have staff or any interns or anything showing that you have a commitment to making sure that your tent is broad and inclusive. There's one more thing I really wanted to lift up. I think it's, one of the things that I think is really important when Gustavo was talking about kind of smaller campaigns. I know a lot of people heard about how Maryland has the bill to ban styrofoam. What a lot of people might not realize is because my day job is I'm an assistant director for the Department of Planning in the city of Baltimore, and the Office of Sustainability is within the planning department. So we have interns that are public school students, high school students, that was their internship. They created their own little organization, Baltimore Beyond Plastic, and for like 2 years, I think almost 3 years, they were working on trying to get a city ordinance to ban styrofoam. And they were successful. And that laid the groundwork for Delegate for Clearman, her district mate, to eventually be able to pass this at the state level. But it was Baltimore City Public School students that were able to get a styrofoam ban with the help of Councilman John Bullock, who's District 9. And I think that's a really, to me, huge story that's missed in this conversation about, oh, Maryland passed that. I'm like, it started with Baltimore students. I think that's really important, And I think that, transgenerational equity is something we don't hear as much conversation about as we do about racial equity, but climate change is all about, are we putting undue burdens on future generations? Are we, kicking the can down the road? But I think even within our advocacy, we are not thinking about transgenerational equity. Those young people couldn't even vote, but they were able to pass a law. You know what I'm trying to say? So no one's too young or too old to have value, and I think that we need to start reaching to even younger groups of people to get them involved, because they have great ideas and a little more time sometimes and a little more energy sometimes, and use it while you can. So I don't know what my time was. He was so conscientious. He actually set his timer when he was talking, and he was like, Daniel, wake up.
I have 2 more minutes. You have 2 more minutes.
Okay. I'm trying to think if anything else that someone said. I think there's nothing wrong with being adversarial. So when you said that, it's really not about knowing when. Because I think if you come out like screaming and you haven't cultivated a relationship with someone you're trying to influence, they might write you off forever. Even though at this point, they're just like, there's nothing. So I just really try to build relationships with electeds. They're just people. And try to figure out as much about their bio. A lot of it's free on the interwebs. Just try to figure out what makes them tick, because I'm starting to realize I have to do it with my own colleagues. Because sometimes I'm sitting around going, so I'm gonna get on this Wikipedia real quick, get this life story together, why are we doing these things? And then it starts to make a little more sense. And then you can start to spoon feed some little different thoughts, because you can't throw it all at someone if you can tell they're not ready to receive it all, but you can slip it in. So I think that you're gonna have your superheroes Delegate Robin Lewis, who's ready, give me that bill, give me that, wonky EJS, let's do it. But that's not going to be the average person, right? So the fact that the styrofoam ban was very explicit, it was about one thing, and these kids broke out this whole list of benefits from it. Sometimes people can hear that one thing. You know what I mean? I think you just have to know when to turn on the faucet and when to make it. You just have to know when's the right time.
Thank you, Stephanie, and I was remiss not recognizing Delegate Robin. Appreciate you being here. Thanks, Stephanie, so much. That was great. And some time is fair. So I want to open it up for conversation and questions. We have about 10-15 minutes. Has anybody? Yes.
Yeah, has anybody seen any effective work done by any faith-based communities as advocates? And what strengths do you think that we could bear, that way that we can't as other grassroots organizations?
I was gonna say I've seen a lot of that. There's a great Reverend Michael Malcolm was here from the Justice First Coalition in Alabama. He already had to go back, and they are going through. They have they're hitting the legislatures from the Georgia, Virginia, North and South Carolina, and they are having all kinds of community meetings, and they're doing really well. Interfaith Power and Light's been doing this for a long time, as you know. Right. I know Minnesota, they've got a fantastic Just Solar initiative. They're doing PMAs, People's Movement Assemblies, working with tribal communities. There's a great group called Solar Bear in northern Minnesota, promoting community solar and solar on schools. And so there's quite a few,
I would say that they're always a great partner, usually because the educational relationships are built in. In the previous panel that we were in, we talked about how just in terms of energy equity, having a congregation stand up and say that they would be the guarantor for their community being able to have solar because they are embedded in that community. Sometimes it's showing up and lobbying, sometimes it's climate in the pulpit, sometimes it's saying, we've been here for 50 years, here's $1,500 to cover every person that's in this community, that we can all get community solar. So I do think I've seen some pretty exciting things come from faith-based communities and
Green the Church.
Yes, Green the Church has really talked across, the idea that the word tree hugger is a negative, it can be a negative connotation in community space. But I do think there are other constituencies. There are unchurched people, there are unbanked people, there are unaffiliated people who all of whom need to be spoken to and who need to have outreach and need to have education done. So I think mimicking some of those best practices and really opening up this space. I mean, we have a robust community in Maryland, Indivisible. We have climate action groups. We have very specific spin-offs of other communities. So I do think this is a really ripe time. There are a lot of angry people, and they are channeling their anger into strategies and tactics.
I have a question. So anyone here that's from Prince George's? Okay, because there's a very strong mega church culture in Prince George's. I mean, I go to a pretty large church in Baltimore City, so I get that. But I don't think people realize how often these pastors do get on the phone and make their case to their Prince George's delegation, at least at the state level, about whatever. So I think that's like an untapped network that people might not be aware of is quite active in Prince George's.
Yeah. And the Catholic Church, the diocese is here, Jose Aguto's here. Catholic Charities and so
Jews for Justice.
yeah, there's a
Yeah,
lot.
they're doing affordable housing work and really pulling people, because that is also a community that has affordable housing issues, even if people would assume that they do not. So I do think there's some really fabulous advocacy groups, and I think it goes to your point about big groups and small groups partnering across the work and make it, one, because it makes it genuine, but two, because it means you can get in the spaces that you might not be able to if you're a big group, and gives you access to resources you might not have if you're a small group. So I think the wave of the future is collective work and strategies with really strong MOUs and memorandums of agreement about who's gonna do what.
Also, several elected officials usually go to church. That's a place that if the church is open and let you have meetings to talk about these issues, it's a good place to go. But I said if the church is open because sometimes also churches get donations.
Yeah.
And depending who donates money to your church, an issue that you might want to talk about it might not be a good issue for that church or the pastor or the priest, whoever is in charge. might say, no, sorry, we cannot talk about this issue here, regardless if the community that goes to the church is the most affected by that issue. But sorry, we are not talking about that here. So yes, open sometimes doors, other times he closes.
And Reverend Barber, Yeah, Reverend Durley, Atlanta. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I was referring to the ask. We have an environmental justice situation in Baltimore with the BMP tunnels and trying to fight it. And we've been talking to former Senator Robinson and then to Leanne Pinkett a couple weeks ago. We've been told you have to fight this on the federal level. It's like, okay, but can you guys come along? Can you give us some support? And so even asking both of them, what Senator Robinson said was, you need to get this PowerPoint in front of the state delegates from Baltimore City. Like, right, but what am I asking them for? Is it a letter? Is it a, whatever I asked Councilman Pinkett, is it a city council resolution? No, that's not really how resolutions work. So,
You're in the 40th district, so your new
I'm in
senator,
40th.
so your senator is Antonio Hayes now.
Antonio Hayes, yes.
Do you have a relationship with him?
He is in favor. He's on our side.
Okay, because what you could ask him to do is to convene a meeting of all of the impacted council districts and the federal representatives for the senators and the federal representatives for the overlapping. I think your entire district is in Elijah Cummings district, is it? Or is
Yes.
it cut up? Because
We're-
some of them are cut up, you know,
Yeah,
weirdly.
the very tail end.
But that's something
really
we're,
in Elijah
that's something
Cummings.
we're doing in our
Street.
district. We're trying to bring all of our council and our federal partners and the state delegation together periodically, because some of these type of things, you're gonna keep hearing different conversations, but when they're all in one room, it's a lot easier for the feds to act, to get the senators, the staff to act, when they're all in the room with the state and the council people. I would ask him to convene that meeting, Senator Hayes.
So at that meeting, when I am asking
Right.
for the meeting, and then the meeting, it's obviously an educational awareness
Right.
thing, but then what is my ask from those senators? In other words, in terms of sending it up,
I don't know the full nature of what the next step is on the federal level, so I don't want to misrepresent it. But actually, they have staff that can research what their action should be if they know it's in their jurisdiction. They have far more capacity than pretty much every other level of government in the room. I mean, we know they're, you know, it's the good thing about the US Senate staff is we all know them because we only have 2 senators. So I can even yeah, so we can at least put you in the right direction. But I mean, have you spoken to Ben Holland?
We met with him actually, like 2 years ago, and.
But not recently.
No, not recently. His thing is basically, I need to hear from a lot more people. So
Yeah,
that's
so
what
that
we're
was
trying.
the issue. So
That's what we're
do
trying
you have
to get.
do you have a letter or anything showing that a lot of people care about this? Maybe a community?
We are gathering that kind of thing,
Okay.
and your coworker Melissa Wells,
Oh,
we
yeah.
met with
Mhm.
her. But it's sort of, okay, so from someone like that, from the state level, what is it we can then take to Van Hollen? I literally don't know the landscape.
I would say if
That's
you
what I'm
have,
saying.
if you have community groups saying this is a problem, and then if you have all the electeds in your state district saying this is a problem, and get the city council, if you can get one letter saying that they all are saying, okay, now Van Hollen, you now have people looking at you to act. His constituent services to me are some of the best in business, so if that's what he needs to act, I would not bring that up.
Yeah. Kennedy, I don't know if it's still.
Probably Obi is the person to talk to.
Okay,
We can connect.
Right. Thank you.
Ma'am.
I currently live in Montgomery County, and my question is kind of related to the Clean Energy Jobs Act and the kind of fallout from that.
There's fallout?
Sorry. You know, a coalition was built around that issue, with the understanding that incinerators would not be part of the RPS, and then that was taken out. And I'm kind of wondering how you guys feel about that. You know, a lot of the groups are still advocating for, we need to have the governor sign this is still a great thing, even though, you know, some people were left out of it. And so I'm wondering, to me, on balance, it seems like it shouldn't go forward, but I'm not hearing the environmental groups, climate groups saying that. So since I know you two, Marilyn, and you've got environmental justice as your core lens of looking at things, what's your perspective on that? And then moving forward, like, where would you recommend people who do care about environmental justice put their energies? Like, you know, I don't know which groups to trust it for.
So I can say this for a number of reasons. One, I'm in District 40, so we should probably talk. 2, I live in Baltimore and I don't want to die of asthma. 3, I used to run an organization called the Maryland Environmental Health Network, that only joined the climate coalition specifically to push them to make sure incineration was included. It was the job that I inherited my very first day at the job. My predecessor was in a multi-year fight with the coalition about whether that was going to be a platform. On my first day, the first thing I found out was, so we said yes, are you gonna bring her in? She's the only Black woman who runs an environmental organization in the state, and we would like her to have it. So it became a platform. The day I started, and I thought, okay, 2 years later, I'm leaving, and almost, within the very short window of time, a lot of things happened along the continuum of how that consensus was built, along how the continuum of how the people who would be the advanced leaders for that bill were chosen, and whether or not the coalition was in conversation the entire time the bill came together. So there were a couple of things that happened, and the folks who were represented in this room were champions for that, for incineration being a part of that work from day one, as a part of that work on day two, and on the final day. But what happened was that the bills got bifurcated through a number of political moves in the middle of a hectic session. And as far as groups that you could trust, I think you have all the information that you need to have about who you can trust. Because if people are telling you that the bill should go forward without the thing that protects Baltimore, they don't live in Baltimore. So all things considered, as much as I want to see a renewable portfolio standard that is at 50%, or I'd rather see one that's at 100%, if it continues all the things that are killing my community, I am disinterested in it as a concept.
So the answer is.
So I do think you have all the information that you need. There are
That I
people
can't
who
trust anyone.
No, I'm not add something. I don't know if she does, because maybe, like, everything I was saying for most of when I was talking, I was really thinking about CJ the entire time when I was talking about it, because to me, that was the problem is that they've been working on this for years. It wasn't like they just introduced CJ for the first time this year. And there had been no real meaningful advocacy to communities of color. And then you throw in a few words like equity here and some jobs, but even the jobs piece, when people are like kicking the tire, looking at what's up with the jobs, people couldn't really articulate a vision for how different workers, no matter where their on-ramp is, in terms of skills and so forth, where's their place in all these jobs? Like, you just can't have like this one specific environmental agenda and then put a Christmas tree of good feeling words and crap on it and then think people are supposed to like jump for joy with you. So I think that like this was such a missed opportunity to cultivate like just a new generation of leaders, and even people who I know were with them in theory were just like underwhelmed by what it meant for poor people, what it meant for Black people, what it meant for all types of people, because they just didn't do that type of work. And it's just maddening to me that people feel like they can skip really creating something for like a third of the legislature to grab hold of it. Like, you're just not even considering how you're going to be lobbying this whole group of people, and then you wonder, well, why aren't they with us? Why are people lukewarm? How could they be so easily convinced by something Cabana said? Because you didn't do your work, and it's not to defend some really awful people that made some really bad decisions from the elected side, but it was easy for them to do it, is what I'm saying, mainly because the environment community didn't do the work.
A different example is, just before we move off of that, I want to say
I don't know people like you, I'm talking
yeah,
about.
no, I'm not, you couldn't offend me
Yeah.
either, so we're good.
Yeah.
Even, because one, that issue I came in on is the one that got cut out, but one I was gonna say is that I think that there actually was some outreach, whether it was deep, whether it was wide, whether it was long lasting, and whether the bill morphed into something else is an entirely different question. And I do think if you watch the space of what's happening in Maryland advocacy, a lot of things are about to fall out as a result of it. So if you watch the work, you will see that the people who always wanted this to work for the communities that are underrepresented will reconfigure. And the folks who are still telling you it's all great and this is what we wanted and a renewable portfolio standard is as is with all the filth that's in it, that's what I meant when I said
You're right.
you already have your information, because there are people who are angry, there are people who are disappointed, there are people who spent years of their lives trying to build a Titanic that could work for a community that is underrepresented in all levels. So I do think we are fortunate to have a really smart Baltimore City delegation, but that just happened. So I just want to point out that like it took a minute. The Titanic didn't sink all at once. And so I think before you decide that the environmental community is not trustworthy, I think you should watch how we react to the different things that are happening, because there are internal decisions that were made that were inappropriate, there were political decisions that were made outside of that space that were inappropriate, and there are communities who still need to have the answers. And if the folks who are now empowered to be able to do something come up with a response to it, and the people who show up to push for it, then you'll have your answers about who's really in this work ain't nobody can do it.
But the jurisdiction of this bill is really important for people to understand. It doesn't go through an environmental committee of General Assembly.
Right.
There's an environment and transportation committee.
Right.
This is about utilities. It goes through economic matters. It is chaired by a Black person from Prince George's County and has a lot of people on the committee, including both of my district mates are on that committee. So what I'm saying is, and including some of the top leaders in the Democratic caucus, what I'm saying is like, it kind of blows my mind. Even the chair of the Baltimore City delegation is on this committee. So I mean, to me, it's like the strategy to reach people who obviously they're not on an environmental committee. The environment is not the front of mind for them. They can easily be led sway by conversations around jobs.
We
Not
have
environment.
okay.
65 jobs out of it.
So people have to look at jurisdictions of committees when they're looking at bills too. Don't look at the top of the bill, look at where the bill is located. And that tells you more about its fate and who needs to be influenced.
I think Delegate Robin wanted to say a word about
Right,
it.
so I'll just stand up so I can see you and you can see me. Thank you guys for your incredibly insightful, honest commentary. Thanks for the chance to speak for a minute. My name is Robin Lewis. I'm a delegate in Baltimore City in the 46th district. That's a district right next to Delegate Smith. The breast incinerator is located in my district and is directly voicing my constituents.
Do you want the mic?
No.
Okay.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I just like to try to answer your question, because what my friends and colleagues up here have done is set the context in which the CEJA bill was deliberated on and passed. But I want to give you some insight into what happens next. What all that happened with that bill over the last few years, right now it's water under the bridge. We passed a bill that is imperfect, and it's really important for advocates to understand that that's just life. There is no perfect bill. The other thing that and I was an advocate before I became a delegate 2 years ago. So I'm like tearing my hair out all the time. I'm like, why can't delegates understand advocates? And I'm like, oh, I'm a freaking advocate. I'm a delegate now. What's really hard for those of us who have that advocate heart to understand is that no bill is perfect, ever. And that the work of our lives is to keep refining and fixing what broke, what got broken, what's imperfect. That's our job. And that's where legislators and policymakers of goodwill and advocates of pure heart and spirit must continually work together. We can't, look, if we had to, this is way over our pay grades. Stephanie's a freshman, I've been there 2 years, we had no power over what happened with that bill. Other than sitting on that floor and voting, we had no power over what happened with that bill. However, what we could see is that there was a lot that was good in that bill, and had we not passed it, we would have lost the opportunity to build and repair and fix and expand in the future. We would have lost something like $260 million in federal grant funding to support renewable energy work. We would have just thrown that in the garbage. How could we do that? So going forward, here's what's happening. There are a lot of people around the state who care about clean air. Believe me, whatever happened with this environmental group or that legislator, it doesn't even matter. The care and concern continues. Here's what I and my colleagues are going to try to do to repair what's wrong with the CEJA bill. Incineration needs to come out of Tier 1. We're getting confused about that. Couldn't pass that bill in any other form. We fixed the piece that's wrong. And what I'm committed to doing, and what my colleague Stephanie Smith is committed to doing, and others are all in, is to take a look over the next 8 or 9 months on how we can refine and revise that bill, create new policy proposals that we can introduce in 2020 to fix what's wrong. What we need to do is take incineration out of the Tier 1. So I'm pulling together a task force. Delegate Smith will be on it. I'll be calling on 350.org and every other person of goodwill, every other organization out there to sit with me, to sit with us over the next several months, hash out what a proposal to remove incineration from Tier 1 might look like. So hash out what a strategy, and I mean a battle plan for what we all need to do. Each of us have a part over the next 9 months to get that poisonous provision out of that bill. And so
the takeaway message for you is join us on fixing the problem. Keep looking forward, because if we dwell too much on what went wrong, we'll be incapacitated. So that was just all.
I think that's a really great way to end this fantastic session. Thank you, panel. I learned a lot. Thank you, audience. This concludes the panels. People have been here since 8 a.m. I applaud you all for
You pay for parking.
right, and for being here and participating. There's a reception. And then at 6 o'clock, our good friend, Gustavo Santiago Ali will be speaking. It will be fantastically inspirational. You don't want to miss that, so please stay. Again, thank you for coming. Congratulations for everything you're doing, and God bless. We'll see you next year.